You ever get a voicemail that rips your entire world out from under you? I did. And I answered with just one word. It wasn't surrender. It was the start of something I didn't even see coming. If you think betrayal only happens in movies, wait until you hear how my own family taught me the hardest lesson I've ever learned. My name's Emily Carter. I'm 30 years old, born and raised in Seattle, Washington, a city that's as much a part of me as the sound of rain on old rooftops. I wasn't just the VP of operations at Carter & Sons Renovations. I was supposed to be its next leader, the one who'd carry my father's legacy forward. Funny how a single voicemail can shatter decades of certainty. I can still see it so clearly. The pale gray morning light spilling onto the cafe's old wooden tables. My phone buzzed once and lit up with Dad. I didn't even think twice about it, just swiped and listened. His voice was clipped, all business. Emily, the board met this morning. We've decided to remove you from Carter & Sons. Don't come back. Don't call. I sat frozen, latte halfway to my mouth, my world falling out from under me. Around me, life didn't even flinch. People laughed about weekend plans. The barista called out orders over the hiss of steamed milk. I forced myself to set my phone down carefully so I wouldn't throw it. My face stayed blank, refusing to betray the storm inside. My entire identity, erased in under 20 seconds. My fingers trembled, but I refused to let the rest of me shake. I opened my messages, my mind screaming at me to call, to beg, to demand why. Instead, I typed a single word, understood, because if they were going to toss me aside like trash, I'd at least leave with my dignity intact. If you've ever had your entire life turned upside down in one moment, you're not alone. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you want to follow along on this messy, raw journey of betrayal and rebuilding, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I promise it only gets more real from here. It was one of those classic Seattle mornings, damp and heavy with the smell of wet concrete. The big bay windows were streaked with rain, distorting the city outside into gray smears of light. Usually this cafe was my happy place, a little refuge of warmth and chatter in the middle of the city's chill. But that day, it felt like a trap, too small to hold the weight in my chest. I sat there pretending to scroll my phone, stirring a latte I couldn't taste. My eyes drifted over the other customers. Students typing furiously, a couple smiling shyly at each other, a dad making goofy faces to make his toddler giggle. I felt like I was behind glass, separated from them by something I couldn't name. It's a special kind of cruelty, realizing the world doesn't even pause for your heartbreak. My knee bounced under the table so hard it rattled. The espresso machine screeched. People laughed. Life went on. Meanwhile, I felt like my lungs had stopped working. I wanted to scream just to make the universe notice I was dying inside. I caught sight of myself reflected in the rain-smeared window. Hair twisted up tight. Makeup pristine. Coat still buttoned perfectly. I looked exactly like the confident professional I'd been an hour ago. But inside I felt gutted. A stranger in my own skin, untethered from everything I thought made me who I was. I wrapped both hands around the hot cup like it might anchor me. One deliberate sip, bitter and too hot, burning my tongue just enough to keep me present. I wouldn't cry here. Not in public. Not where my shame would be on display for strangers to gawk at. That breakdown would come later, somewhere private. I'd spent years learning to be unflappable. Construction sites are no place for panic or tears, and I'd made sure no one could ever say I got there because I was Jack Carter's daughter. That discipline kept me sitting straight in that cafe chair, back stiff, face neutral, even with my heart trying to pound its way out of my chest. But inside, I was boiling. Betrayal has a special heat, a corrosive burn that starts in your gut and eats its way out. I thought about every late night spent on bids, every weekend sacrificed to keep projects on schedule, every moment I'd tried to prove I deserved the role. My father hadn't even bothered to look me in the eye. I squeezed my hands into fists until my nails bit deep enough to hurt. Around me, the city was indifferent. Espresso machines hissing, orders shouted over the hum, a bell jingling as someone new walked in. The world didn't even flinch at my devastation. It was humiliating in a way I can't quite explain. Understood. That was my answer. Not because I accepted it, but because it was the only power left to me in that moment. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't plead. If they wanted me gone, fine. But they'd never get to see me on my knees. They'd never hear me crack. I finally pushed back my chair carefully, grabbing my bag with mechanical precision. The untouched latte stayed on the table. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. The voicemail seared into my memory. I walked out into the wet Seattle morning with no plan, no idea what came next, just the one certainty that I wasn't going back. I didn't choose understood because it was polite. I chose it because it was the only weapon I had left. It was my way of saying, You don't get to see me beg. Even typing it felt like choking on glass. But I refused to give them a single tear or question. That one word held every ounce of defiance I had left. It wasn't surrender. It was the coldest form of resistance I knew how to muster in that moment. If they wanted to erase me from the company, they could. But they wouldn't see me crumble. My dad had taught me to hold the line, to finish what I started. That day, the only thing I could finish was my own dignity. I remember my thumb hovering over the send button. My hand was shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. Part of me wanted to type 1,000 words, ask him why, demand he remember who I was. Instead, I hit send and felt the world tilt, like gravity itself was changing. I sat back in my chair, breathing slow. People kept talking around me, oblivious. It was almost insulting how normal everything was. I watched a teenager try to balance a tower of napkins. A woman squeeze her friend's arm while laughing. I felt completely severed from all of it, like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. I wiped my eyes quickly, not crying exactly, but fighting the sting. I wouldn't fall apart here. If they wanted me gone, fine. But I was leaving on my own 2 feet. No spectacle, no scene. Just one quiet promise to myself. I would figure this out, even if I had no idea how yet. It's funny how you can lose your entire sense of self in under a minute. One voicemail. And I wasn't VP anymore. I wasn't Jack Carter's right hand. I wasn't Carter & Sons' future. I was no one. Just a woman with a lukewarm latte going cold on the table. My title had been stripped as easily as deleting a file. All those years I spent proving I belonged. Gone. I thought about every holiday spent drafting proposals, every weekend checking site progress, the way I skipped parties and dates because the business always came first. It felt like a punch in the gut, realizing none of it actually mattered to them. The betrayal was the worst part, not the job loss or even the money, but knowing my own family had decided I wasn't worth a conversation, not even worth looking in the eye. They just cut me off, like an infected limb. I felt like I was watching my own funeral, except no one bothered to show up. I sat there feeling both rage and heartbreak twist in my chest. It wasn't even just my career that died. It was the sense of home I'd always carried. Carter & Sons wasn't just a company. It was our family's identity, my inheritance, my promise to my father, the thing I'd worked my entire life to deserve. I realized I had no idea who I was without it. The thought was as terrifying as it was humiliating. I wasn't Emily Carter, VP of Operations anymore. I was just Emily. And in that moment, that felt like being no one at all. I know this is heavy. Trust me, I wish it wasn't my story to tell. But if you've ever felt blindsided by the people you trusted most, if you've ever had your whole world yanked out from under you while everyone else kept sipping their coffee, then I hope you know you're not alone. This isn't just about business, it's about betrayal. If any of this is resonating with you, I'd love for you to stick around. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this journey. Because this is only the beginning. There's so much more to tell. Not just the collapse, but what comes after. The messy, painful, hopeful rebuilding. I want to share this story with you because it's real. No sugarcoating, no easy answers. Just the truth about what it feels like to have everything you built ripped away, and to figure out how to keep going anyway. Because maybe you're there too, or maybe you know someone who is. If you're watching this, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. Tell me if you've ever had to start over. I read every single one. It's these connections that remind me we're all human. That even when we feel cut off, there's someone else out there who gets it. So thanks for being here, for listening, for caring enough to stay. Because this isn't just my story. It's for anyone who's ever had to look at the wreckage of their old life and whisper, I'll find a way. Even if you have no clue how yet. Growing up in Seattle wasn't just about drizzly mornings and evergreen trees. It was waking up to the smell of fresh lumber, hearing my dad's truck rumble down the street before dawn. My name's Emily Carter, and for as long as I can remember, Carter & Sons wasn't just the family business. It was our identity, our pride, my destiny. I was the kid who brought blueprints to show and tell instead of stuffed animals, the one who could name every tool in my dad's kit by age 7. Some people inherit jewelry or family recipes. I inherited hard hats, steel-toed boots, and a relentless work ethic. And I loved it. Every splinter, every late night, every challenge. Dad used to say I was born with sawdust in my veins. I guess I believed him. It was the only world I ever wanted to belong to. While other kids dreamed about moving away, I dreamed about designing buildings that would last longer than any of us. It never occurred to me to question whether I fit in. I just knew I did. Even back then, I was the overachiever. I graduated early, double majored in business and sustainable design at the University of Washington. Every decision I made felt like laying another brick in the path to taking over Carter and Sons. Nobody ever doubted it, least of all me. It sounds naive now, but I honestly thought dedication would protect me. That if I worked harder than anyone, proved myself 100 times over, nothing could ever shake my place in the company or in my family. Looking back, I see how blind I was to the cracks forming under the surface. Carter and Sons started small. My dad, Jack Carter, bought a beat-up pickup and took any job he could, fixing leaky roofs, patching drywall, replacing windows. Back then, he did the work himself, sunup to sundown. My mom handled the books from a folding card table in the living room. It was humble, but it was ours. They grew it into something bigger through sheer grit and word of mouth. By the time I was in middle school, we had a fleet of trucks with our logo stenciled on the doors. We were the company people called when they wanted a job done right. Every project was a point of pride. Every satisfied client proof that we'd built something worth believing in. When Dad started landing bigger contracts, libraries, schools, civic buildings, he acted like it was just another day. But I remember the look in his eyes the first time we drove past a completed project with the Carter name on the plaque. He was proud. So was I. Those buildings felt like monuments to our family's story. We weren't flashy, we weren't corporate, we were a family business, through and through. That meant something to the crews who'd been with us 20 years, to the clients who kept coming back, to every kid who grew up with our trucks parked out front. It meant everything to me. Sometimes I think that's why it hurt so much to lose it. It wasn't just a company. It was my childhood, my purpose, the place where I believed I'd always belong. The idea that they could decide I didn't fit anymore, that was the real heartbreak. Some of my earliest memories are of sitting on a stack of drywall, swinging my legs while Dad walked clients through blueprints. He'd gesture with a pencil, explaining how the foundation had to be perfect, or the whole building would fail. Even as a little kid, I understood those words meant more than construction. I used to follow him around in my tiny tool belt, asking questions until he finally had to laugh and scoop me up onto his shoulders. From up there, everything felt possible. He'd point to the beams and say, "See that, Em? You have to know how every piece connects." He wasn't just teaching me about buildings, he was teaching me how to be part of something bigger. At the end of the day, he'd buy us both grape sodas from the vending machine, and we'd sit on the tailgate of the truck watching the sunset over half-finished houses. That's when he'd tell me stories about how he started with nothing, about how no one believed he'd make it, about how he built something from sheer will. I don't think he ever realized how much I soaked up every word. To me, he was larger than life, equal parts hero and teacher. All I wanted was to be like him someday. Strong, determined. Someone people could count on when things got tough. I think that's why his voice in that voicemail felt so cold, so final. Like a stranger was speaking to me instead of the man who once lifted me onto his shoulders and said, "This will all be yours someday." By the time high school ended, there was no real question about my path. I didn't rebel, didn't even apply out of state. University of Washington felt like the natural extension of my life, not some new beginning. I double majored in business and sustainable design, convinced those tools would make me a better leader for Carter and Sons. While other students partied or traveled, I spent nights in the library crunching cost analyses or refining green building strategies. Professors loved that I could talk real-world implementation, not just theory. I wanted to make construction better, not just cheaper, but smarter, more sustainable. That was my mission before I even had a title. I remember leading group projects like they were actual bids, refusing to settle for half measures. My classmates joked I was more like a foreman than a student. I didn't mind. I took it as proof I was already living the role I'd come home to claim. I didn't just want the family business. I wanted to make it the best. Graduation day felt less like an ending and more like a pit stop on my way back to the office. I delivered the student commencement speech in my cap and gown, heart pounding but voice clear. I talked about legacy and responsibility, about building not just structures but trust. My dad was there in the front row, pretending not to tear up. Afterward, he clapped me on the shoulder and asked if I was sure about turning down corporate offers. I could tell he was proud, even as he warned me how hard it would be. But we both knew there was only one place I was going. Home, to Carter and Sons, to the dream we shared, even if neither of us could see how it would end. When I finally joined full-time, I made one promise to myself. No one would ever say I got here just because of my last name. I refused to be the boss's kid who breezed through. I showed up before dawn and stayed until the crews were gone, checking punch lists by headlamp if I had to. I learned every trade we hired, from HVAC to drywall to finished carpentry, so no one could catch me bluffing. I wasn't afraid to crawl under houses, balance on scaffolding, or pour concrete in the rain. That's how I earned respect. Not through orders, but by never asking anyone to do something I wouldn't do myself. It wasn't about ego. It was survival. Construction sites aren't kind to people who don't belong. And I needed everyone to know I belonged. Even my dad treated me like any other manager. He didn't give me a pass. If anything, he was harder on me. But I didn't mind. I welcomed it. By the time I moved into operations, the crews listened when I spoke. Not because of my title, but because they trusted me. I streamlined supply chains, renegotiated vendor contracts, cut waste. We saved thousands without laying off a single worker. Dad might not have said it much, but I could see it in his nods. He was proud. I thought I was making us stronger, preparing us for the future. I didn't see the resentment it sparked in other corners. I didn't realize success could be the thing that put a target on my back. Back then, I thought hard work solved everything. I had no idea how naive that really was. Carter & Sons wasn't just a company to me. It was the family table where deals were drawn on napkins. The warehouse where I learned to drive a forklift before I could legally drive a car. The site where I fell off a ladder and Dad told me to shake it off, but then carried me to the truck when he thought no one was looking. Every contract I signed felt like a promise to my family. Every project that finished on time and under budget was a small act of devotion. I didn't clock out at 5. I carried the work in my head everywhere. I woke up with solutions to site problems and fell asleep worrying about weather delays. I didn't just want to run the business someday. I wanted to deserve it. I wanted to be the one who carried it forward better than before. Not just for the paycheck, but for the people who'd given their lives to it. For the reputation that meant so much to our clients. For my dad, who'd started it all with nothing. When he said it would be mine and Nathan's equally, I believed him. Even though I could see my brother wasn't interested in the same way. Even though he cut corners I wouldn't and told clients things we couldn't deliver. I just kept thinking we'd figure it out. That family would win in the end. But I guess I missed something fundamental. You can love something so fiercely you don't see the cracks forming. I thought loyalty was enough to hold us together. I never imagined it would be the very thing they used to push me out. It didn't happen all at once. Looking back, the first cracks were so subtle I convinced myself they weren't even there. Dad started questioning my decisions more, but in that offhand way that felt like teasing. "You sure about that vendor, Em?" With a raised eyebrow. I'd laugh it off and double-check the numbers. Nathan, my older brother, was always harder to read. He was all charm with clients. He could sell a snowplow in July. But he never liked the nitty-gritty. I'd cover for him constantly, fixing bids he'd lowballed or smoothing over delivery delays he caused. I figured that was family. You help, you don't complain. But he started pushing back too, rolling his eyes when I talked about sustainability features, telling me to chill when I worried about vendor ethics or contract details. I'd laugh it off at first, but it started to sting. Dad would just sigh and tell me, he'll grow into it, like Nathan was some eternal teenager who'd magically mature one day. Meanwhile, I felt like I was aging in dog years trying to keep us afloat. I held it together with duct tape and spreadsheets, determined to make it work. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that once Nathan saw the big picture, he'd come around. That if I just proved myself enough, they'd see I was right. But the truth was, proving myself was starting to feel like pushing against a locked door. Every win felt a little hollow. Every late night in the office felt a little lonelier. I couldn't see it yet, but they were already building walls to shut me out. And I was too busy working to notice. The first time Dad mentioned Walter Reeves, he made it sound harmless. Just bringing in another set of eyes, he said over takeout in the conference room. I nodded because what else could I do? But there was something in his tone I didn't like. It was too casual, like he was trying to sell it to me. Walter was slick in that way older guys in construction sometimes are. Gray hair, tailored vests, always with a laugh just a little too loud. He was a family friend from way back apparently, though I'd barely met him growing up. He talked about legacy a lot, how he respected what Dad had built, but I noticed he never talked much about the actual work. He started coming to meetings, just to listen, but it didn't stay that way. Soon he was asking questions about margins and materials, suggesting tweaks to staffing, always so polite, so helpful. But somehow his suggestions always contradicted mine, and Dad started listening to him, more than he listened to me. I told myself it was fine, that another perspective was healthy. I didn't want to be the defensive daughter who refused outside help, but I couldn't shake the feeling Walter wasn't there to help me. He was there to help Dad feel better about pushing back on my ideas without having to say no himself. It got under my skin in a way nothing else had. I'd worked so hard to be taken seriously, to be seen as the operations expert. Suddenly, this guy walks in with a smile and a handshake, and everyone acts like he's the second coming of project management. It was the first time I felt real panic about my place at Carter and Sons. It started small. Dad and Nathan would grab lunch with Walter, waving me off with just catching up. I tried to believe it. Family, right? But those lunches got longer, more frequent. Sometimes they'd lower their voices when I walked by. The first few times I laughed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. Then decisions started getting made without me. Vendor contracts canceled with no explanation. Marketing campaigns I'd spent weeks on, paused indefinitely. I'd ask about it and get vague answers. We're rethinking things, just waiting for the right time. My desk started to feel like a waiting room no one planned to call me out of. I remember the day I found new blueprints on the conference room table. My sustainable design stripped bare, replaced with standard, cheaper materials. Dad was there with Walter and Nathan, talking about value engineering like it was gospel. When I asked what was going on, they went quiet. Walter was the one who finally spoke, with that gentle condescension that made my blood boil. "Emily, we're just being realistic about the market." Dad wouldn't even meet my eyes. Nathan just smirked like he'd won something. I left that room shaking with anger, but also with the first real taste of fear. That was the moment I realized something was happening behind my back, that I wasn't paranoid. I was being shut out. My own family was making plans that didn't include me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I tried to tell myself it was a phase, that Dad was just overwhelmed with the company's growth, but pretty soon the sidelining wasn't subtle anymore. I'd walk into the office to find meetings I should have led already in progress. My name left off invites. My proposals lost in the shuffle. Projects I'd nurtured from concept to bid got reassigned with no warning. Nathan started pitching clients on ideas he'd once mocked me for, but somehow they sounded better coming from him. Walter called it streamlining responsibilities, but it felt more like cutting me out piece by piece. I remember sitting in my car after one particularly brutal day, watching the rain soak the windshield. My phone was silent in my lap. No calls from Dad explaining, no apologies. I kept thinking, this can't be real. I'd given them everything. My time, my ideas, my loyalty, and it wasn't enough. Every time I tried to talk to Dad about it, he brushed me off. "Don't overthink it, Em. We're all on the same team." But his eyes wouldn't meet mine, and Nathan just looked smug, like he'd been waiting for this day. It was like someone flipped a switch, and suddenly I was the outsider in my own company. But I refused to quit. I showed up every day, earlier than anyone else, determined to prove they still needed me. Even as they closed doors in my face, I held on to hope, because this was supposed to be ours. This was home. I couldn't imagine they'd really force me out. Even family dinners felt different. We used to talk shop over mashed potatoes, planning out timelines between bites. But lately it was all forced smiles and silent chewing. Nathan would brag about new directions, and Dad would nod without looking at me. I'd stab at my food, heart pounding, pretending it didn't hurt. Mom noticed. She always noticed. She'd reach for my hand under the table, squeezing it just once before letting go. But she rarely spoke up. She wasn't part of the business. That was always Dad's domain. She'd say she didn't want to take sides, but the sides were becoming impossible to ignore. One night, as we cleared dishes, she finally said it. "Be careful, Emily." Just those 2 words, whispered so Dad wouldn't hear. I froze with a plate in my hands. "What do you mean?" She shook her head quickly. "Just watch yourself." Then she changed the subject, eyes darting toward the living room. I spent the rest of that night lying awake in my old childhood bedroom, listening to the rain hit the roof. Her words echoed over and over. "Be careful." Careful of what? My own family? The thought made me sick, but I couldn't shake it. That warning felt like the first crack in something I'd always thought was unbreakable. The next morning, she hugged me longer than usual. I wanted to ask her what she knew, but I couldn't find the words. Or maybe I was too afraid of the answer. I left early, heart pounding, rehearsing ways to bring it up with Dad that I never got the chance to use. Even with all the signs, I kept telling myself it wasn't betrayal. That family didn't do that. I found reasons to justify every slight. Dad was stressed. Nathan was immature. Walter was just trying to help. I twisted myself in knots, trying to see it all in the best light. I'd lie awake replaying conversations, convincing myself I was overreacting. I didn't want to be the paranoid, ungrateful daughter who couldn't handle criticism. I thought if I worked harder, was more understanding, they'd see I was still the best choice to lead. I still believed love and loyalty would win. But things kept changing when I wasn't looking. Contracts I'd negotiated quietly rewritten. Vendors I'd vetted dropped for cheaper options. Design choices I'd fought for erased without a word. Every day I felt my grip on the company loosen, even as I tried to hold on harder. I remember the gut punch of seeing my own proposals with Nathan's name on them. watching him charm clients with plans I'd developed from scratch. It wasn't just losing credit, it was losing my voice. My ideas twisted into something unrecognizable. I felt like I was disappearing. And still, I told myself it would pass. That families fight but don't break. That if I just kept showing up, kept giving them my all, they'd have to see. It's embarrassing to admit now, but back then, denial was easier than admitting I was already being cut out of the life I'd built. I'd spent weeks preparing the proposal for our biggest sustainable build yet. Hours lost in spreadsheets, sketching out innovative ways to reduce costs without cutting quality. It was my answer to every concern Dad had raised about margins. A project that would prove sustainability wasn't a buzzword, but our future. I walked into that meeting clutching my binder like a lifeline. I stood at the head of the table and poured my heart into every slide, laying out cost savings, long-term benefits, press opportunities. I wanted them to see my vision, to see our potential. For a few seconds, the room was silent. Then Dad glanced at his watch. "Let's table this for now," he muttered, already shuffling papers. The words crashed over me like ice water. Nathan leaned back, smirking, saying nothing. Walter gave me this pitying smile I wanted to slap off his face. No one even pretended to care. I sat down slowly, fingers gripping the table until they hurt. My heart thumped in my ears so loud I couldn't hear the next agenda item. It wasn't rejection of a plan, it was rejection of me. I was invisible. Unwelcome. The girl who didn't know when to shut up. Afterward, I sat in my car in the lot for an hour. I couldn't bring myself to turn the key. My binder was on the seat beside me like a gravestone for my hopes. I realized then they didn't want my ideas. They didn't want me. And no matter how much I loved them, that wouldn't change. A week later, I found the new blueprints spread across the conference room table. I almost didn't recognize them. The solar panels were gone. Rainwater collection systems deleted. Sustainable materials replaced with cheap imports. It wasn't my design anymore. It was a mockery of it. I ran my fingers over the paper, tracing lines that felt like a betrayal in ink. These weren't tweaks. This was gutting the soul of the project I'd fought for. I felt sick, like something had died. When I heard voices approaching, I forced myself to straighten up, wiping my eyes. Dad, Walter, and Nathan walked in mid-laugh. They went quiet when they saw me. I asked, voice shaking, "What is this?" Walter gave me that calm, condescending tone. "We're just making practical adjustments." Dad wouldn't even look at me. Nathan just shrugged. I remember snapping. My voice broke as I told them the city approved the design based on those green features, that we'd marketed ourselves as the sustainable choice, that this would be fraud. They exchanged glances like I was a child throwing a tantrum. No one took me seriously. I left the room shaking, vision blurry. It was the first time I truly felt shut out. Not just ignored, but actively undermined. They weren't just changing a design. They were changing the company's values, and they didn't want me to be part of it anymore. It only got worse after that. Meetings I'd always led got moved without telling me. Invitations stopped arriving in my inbox. I'd hear about decisions secondhand from project managers apologizing awkwardly. Suddenly, I wasn't operations VP. I was an afterthought. One afternoon, I walked by the conference room and saw Dad, Nathan, Walter, and 2 board members deep in discussion. Blueprints spread out, notes everywhere. I pressed my hand to the glass, heart pounding. That was supposed to be my meeting, my project, my seat at that table. I tried the handle, but the door was locked. I stood there like an idiot while they talked over my work like I didn't exist. After a minute, I forced myself to walk away before they saw the tears in my eyes. My legs felt like lead, each step heavier than the last. Later that week, I found out they'd signed an agreement with a luxury developer I'd warned them against. A deal done over steak dinners I wasn't invited to. When I asked Dad about it, he said it was just a casual meeting, like I was stupid enough to believe that. At some point, I stopped fighting. Not because I agreed, but because I was exhausted. I was watching the company I loved slip through my fingers. And for the first time, I wondered if I even had the strength left to hold on. It wasn't long before even my assistant started looking nervous around me. Jessica was loyal, but she avoided my eyes, typing faster than usual when I walked by. One afternoon, she asked if we could talk outside. We ended up on a bench in the parking lot, Seattle drizzle soaking our jackets. She twisted her hands in her lap before finally blurting it out. "I probably shouldn't tell you this." My stomach dropped. She looked around like someone might be listening. "They've been having meetings without you. Almost every day." I didn't want to hear it, but I made her keep going. "Walter's son, Luke Reeves, has been in twice this week," she whispered. "They're showing him around, like he's already hired." My vision went white around the edges. She wouldn't meet my gaze. "They took him through your office." I felt like I'd been punched in the throat. I forced my voice not to shake. "Did Dad know?" She nodded miserably. He was there both times. Laughing with them. That hurt worse than anything. It wasn't just business, it was personal. My own father planning to replace me with a stranger like I was a broken tool to be tossed. I thanked her numbly and walked back inside like a robot. Every step felt wrong. My desk felt alien. My name on the door was a lie. I sat in my chair and stared at nothing, realizing for the first time that I wasn't fighting to save my job. I was fighting to prove I even existed to them anymore. It all came to a head on a rainy Tuesday. I'd just left a client meeting that had gone better than I'd dared hope. I felt light for the first time in weeks, clutching my notes like a promise of the future. I called Dad, excited to share the news, but he didn't answer. I shrugged it off and headed for coffee. I was waiting for my latte when my phone buzzed. Dad's name. Relief washed over me. I didn't even think before hitting play on the voicemail, but his voice was cold, emotionless. Emily, the board met this morning. We've decided to remove you from Carter & Sons. Your access is revoked. Don't come back. Don't call. No greeting. No explanation. Just the words that killed my entire life in 15 seconds. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the phone. Around me, the coffee shop was alive with normalcy. People laughing, typing, living. None of them saw me shatter. I felt my breath shorten, heart hammering so hard it hurt. I swallowed bile, refusing to cry in front of strangers. I listened again, just to make sure I'd heard right, but there was no mistake. My father had fired me by voicemail. The man who taught me everything didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. I lowered the phone slowly, numb. I knew I could call back, beg, rage, demand answers. Instead, I opened my texts with trembling fingers. I typed a single word, understood, and hit send, because it was the only power I had left, the only thing they hadn't stolen from me yet. That one word was my last act of defiance. Understood. No pleading, no bargaining, just a cold, final acknowledgement. It wasn't forgiveness. It was survival. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of hearing me crack. I wouldn't give them any more pieces of me to throw away. My coffee sat untouched on the table, cooling in the gray light. I forced myself to stand, shoulders back, even though my legs felt like they might give. I ignored the stares of strangers. Let them wonder why my eyes were shining. Let them judge. I was done performing. Outside, the rain was relentless. Seattle's usual mist had turned into a steady downpour, soaking my coat instantly. I didn't care. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, trying to feel something, but all I felt was hollow, like they'd scooped my insides out and left me a shell. I kept replaying the voicemail in my head, his flat tone, the finality of it. It wasn't just being fired, it was being erased, disowned without the courtesy of a conversation, without a chance to defend myself. My whole life, gone in less time than it took to order coffee. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking uncontrollably. I didn't start it for a long time, just sat there, wet hair plastered to my face, watching the windshield blur with rain. I felt like I was drowning on dry land, but I held on to one truth. I wouldn't beg. Not for them, not for anyone. The next morning I woke up at 5, muscle memory pushing me out of bed before I remembered. I picked up my phone automatically to check my work email. Access denied. It felt like a slap in the face. I tried again, slower this time, as if that would change the result. Nothing. My company credit card was declined when I stopped for gas. I stood at the pump, cheeks burning as the machine beeped in rejection. The same card I'd used for site visits, business lunches, everything that made me feel legitimate. Now I was just another person without enough credit. When I drove to the office out of habit, my keycard didn't work. I stood there in the rain, pressing it over and over like an idiot, watching green turn to red, over and over. No one came to the door. No one let me in. It was like I'd been erased overnight. Even my voicemail password had been changed. I couldn't hear the dozens of confused client messages stacking up, asking for updates, looking for direction. They were probably wondering where I'd gone, wondering why I'd ghosted them. It felt like my whole reputation was falling apart in real time. I sat in my car with the heater blasting, staring at my shaking hands. Everything I'd worked for was gone, not slowly, not with warning, but yanked away so thoroughly it was like I'd never been there. I felt like I was vanishing, molecule by molecule. My phone buzzed constantly in those first days. Texts from project managers asking what to do next. Emails from vendors wondering if rumors were true. Even clients I'd personally courted were sending confused, worried questions. I didn't know what to tell them. I didn't even know what I was anymore. Each buzz was another reminder of what I'd lost. Every message felt like a tiny dagger twisting deeper. They wanted answers I couldn't give. They deserved leadership I wasn't allowed to provide. It felt like betrayal on top of betrayal, not just by my family, but by my own silence. I started ignoring the calls, turning my phone face down so I wouldn't see the names flashing. People who used to trust me, people I'd fought to serve well. Now I was just nothing to them. No authority, no promise, just a black hole where their VP used to be. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, wondering what I could have said or done to change it. My mind wouldn't stop circling those last words from Dad. Don't come back. Don't call. It was so final it felt like a funeral. But the worst part was realizing there wouldn't even be a funeral for me. No goodbye. No explanation to the people I cared about. I was expected to disappear quietly, like I'd never mattered at all. Losing the job was one thing. Losing myself was another. I didn't know what to do with my mornings anymore. I'd trained myself to wake before dawn, but now there was nowhere to go. I'd sit at my kitchen table, staring at the wall, willing myself to move. I stopped wearing my work clothes. They felt like a costume for a role that wasn't mine anymore. My blazer hung over a chair for days. My hard hat gathered dust on a shelf. Every time I saw the Carter & Sons logo, my stomach turned. It felt like a lie. Food lost its taste. Coffee didn't help. Sleep was an enemy. My brain wouldn't shut up, replaying every decision I'd made, every warning sign I'd ignored. I wondered if I really was too pushy, too focused on sustainability, too much. I started believing maybe they'd been right to cut me out. The apartment I'd chosen for its short commute to the office suddenly felt like a prison. I walked from room to room, touching framed photos of groundbreakings, signed contracts, client thank yous, all worthless now, relics of a life that didn't exist anymore. Some days I didn't even open the blinds. I let the Seattle gloom seep in, matching it breath for breath. I stopped answering friends who asked if I was okay, because how do you tell them you don't know who you are anymore? A week later, I got a call from my doorman saying there were boxes for me. I went downstairs to find 4 cardboard containers stacked neatly, my name scrawled in black marker. They were from the office. My entire career, my identity, reduced to a courier delivery. Inside were the trophies I'd won for Project Excellence, shoved in with no padding. Frames cracked. My potted plant spilled dirt everywhere, its roots exposed and dry. Notes from clients thanking me for saving them, time and money were crumpled at the bottom. It felt violent, deliberate. At the very bottom, under broken picture frames, was an envelope. Inside was a legal separation agreement, offering 3 months severance pay if I agreed not to sue or talk. There was a sticky note in Dad's handwriting. Sign and return for payment. No apology, no explanation. Just business. I held that paper in shaking hands for hours. It felt like they were paying me to vanish, to forget, to pretend I hadn't spent my life keeping that company afloat. I knew if I signed it, I was agreeing with their version of events, that I wasn't needed, that I deserved this. I put the envelope in a drawer and didn't look at it for days. I told myself I wouldn't take the money, that I'd figure it out on my own. But even then, in the back of my mind, I knew my pride couldn't pay rent. And that knowledge was its own special kind of shame. After that, it was radio silence. No calls from Dad, no texts from Nathan. Even Mom went quiet, answering with one-word replies or not at all. It felt like they'd decided I wasn't family anymore, like I'd died, and they'd just moved on. I checked the company website late one night, heart pounding. My bio was gone, my photo removed from the leadership page. Every project I'd led now credited vaguely to the Carter & Sons team, like I'd never existed, like 7 years of blood and sweat had just evaporated. Clients I'd become friends with stopped returning calls. I could feel the rumors spreading, the polite corporate way people distance themselves from a sinking ship. No one wanted to choose sides. It was easier to forget me than risk upsetting Dad or the new leadership. Even the office itself seemed determined to forget. When I tried to visit once on pure instinct, the receptionist blinked like she didn't know me. Security asked me to leave. My keycard had been disabled for days. I wasn't welcome anymore. I wasn't anything anymore. That was the worst part. Not the loss of title or salary, but the loss of belonging. The realization that family was conditional, that love came with terms I hadn't read carefully enough, that I was only welcome when I was useful. If you're still here, listening to all of this, I want to say thank you. It's not easy to share this, but I know someone out there needs to hear it. If you've ever felt discarded by people you trusted most, if you've ever been erased from your own story, know you're not alone. I'm sharing this because betrayal doesn't look like movie drama. Sometimes it's quiet, administrative, a cold email or a voicemail that ends your life as you knew it. If you want to hear the rest of this journey, how I survived, How I Rebuilt. Please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps the channel reach more people who might need these stories. And if you felt especially moved, there's a little super thanks button below. It's a way to support these raw, honest videos so I can keep making them. Just click it and leave a tip if you want. Even a small contribution helps keep this channel going, helps me tell these stories that don't get sugar-coated, that remind people they're not alone in the wreckage, because these stories matter, even the ugly ones, especially the ugly ones. So thank you for being here, for listening, for caring, and stick around because this isn't the end of the story. Not even close. I didn't move out of my old apartment so much as retreat. I downsized to a cramped studio in a rougher part of town, the kind where the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing through the night. My old place had been walking distance from the office. The location chosen like everything else in my life to serve Carter and Sons. Now it felt like a monument to a life I didn't get to have anymore. I sold half my furniture, living among boxes I couldn't bear to unpack. My severance check sat on the counter for days before I forced myself to cash it, fingers shaking with shame. Pride didn't pay rent, and I was too tired to keep pretending I didn't need help. I stopped setting alarms. There was nowhere to be. No meetings to prepare for. I woke up when the sun hit my eyes through cheap blinds and sat on the edge of the bed, willing my legs to move. Coffee lost its taste. Food sat untouched on plates. My phone buzzed less and less as people stopped trying to check in, as even my friends seemed to sense there was nothing left to say. I scrolled through photos on my phone late at night. Groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, selfies with the crew. Every one of them felt like a cruel joke now. I tried applying for jobs, but my heart wasn't in it. The construction industry here is tight-knit. Everyone heard the rumors. Interviews went cold the moment they realized my last name. No one wanted the drama. I couldn't even blame them. I'd sit there in borrowed office chairs across from polite HR managers nodding sympathetically, knowing I wouldn't get a call back. I wasn't just unemployed. I was untouchable. My father hadn't just fired me, he'd branded me. I spent too many nights on the floor of that studio, with a bottle of cheap wine, laptop open to half-finished resumes. I couldn't figure out who I was selling anymore. What skills did I even have? If they didn't want them? I was supposed to be running a company, not begging for contract work on job boards. I'd read old recommendation letters from clients I couldn't call anymore, my eyes blurring until the words made no sense. I felt like I'd died, but my body didn't get the memo. The worst part was realizing there was no cavalry coming. No apology from Dad. No late-night text from Nathan. No call from Mom begging me to come home. They had made their choice, and all I had left was me, and even I wasn't sure I was worth saving. It was in one of those bleak late mornings, when the rain was pounding so hard on my window it sounded angry, that my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I was tired of telemarketers and well-meaning friends who didn't know what to say. But something made me pick it up, voice cracking from disuse as I croaked out, "Hello?" And there was Caroline Adams on the other end. Her voice warm but no nonsense, just like I remembered from the joint project we'd done years back. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Emily, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your email bounces back. Your old number is dead. I had to dig for this one." My brain was foggy with depression and embarrassment, but hearing someone use my name like it still meant something jolted me. I mumbled an apology, my voice shaking. She cut me off gently but firmly. "Listen, I don't care what's going on with Carter and Sons. I know what you can do." She explained her firm had landed a city contract for a small community center in North Seattle. Tight budget, challenging site, strict sustainability requirements. No one else wanted it because the margins were terrible. She did. She believed in what it could be. And she believed I was the only person she trusted to figure it out. Her words felt like someone punching through the concrete I'd poured around my own heart. I swallowed hard and tried to speak, but nothing came out at first. "I know you're going through something," she said, voice lowering, "but don't waste your talent. Don't let them win by disappearing. Think about it." And then she was gone. The line dead before I could protest or promise or even cry. I stared at my cracked phone screen for a long time, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Anger, not at her, at myself, for letting them bury me. I spent the rest of the day pacing the tiny room, talking to the walls, to the rain, to myself. "You can't do it," I told myself. "You're ruined." But another voice, quieter but stubborn, whispered, "Or you can try." By sunset, I had Caroline's number saved under Hope. I didn't know if I'd call her, but for the first time, there was someone to call. It took me 3 more days to get up the nerve to call her back. My fingers hovered over her name in my contacts, sweaty and shaking. I was terrified she'd rescind the offer, terrified she wouldn't. When she answered, She sounded busy, like she'd almost forgotten she'd made the offer at all. Emily, you ready to talk now? I cleared my throat and said yes. That single word felt heavier than the severance check I'd cashed in shame. She didn't coddle me. She laid out the realities with brisk efficiency. The site was small, flood-prone, and in a low-income neighborhood with residents suspicious of gentrification. The budget was laughable. The city wanted LEED certification but had no plan for how to get there. Other firms had turned it down flat. She wanted it anyway. She wanted it done right. I listened in stunned silence. This wasn't a lifeline. It was a dare. She wasn't offering me charity. She was offering me a chance to prove who I said I was. My heart thumped in my chest like it used to in those late nights at the office, elbows deep in cost projections. I realized how much I missed that sound, how much I missed caring. When I finally spoke, my voice was stronger. I don't even know if I'm allowed to, I admitted. The non-compete, she snorted. I had my lawyer check. It doesn't apply. You're consulting, not stealing clients. I felt a sob catch in my throat. Relief, anger, hope. It all twisted together. She paused. Emily, do you want this? I closed my eyes, pressing my palm to my forehead. I could see the blueprints in my mind already. See the cracked concrete, the mud, the neighbors who deserved better than another cheap box slapped onto their street. I didn't know if I was ready, but I was willing. Yes, I whispered. I want it. And for the first time in forever, I meant it. That call lit a fire in me I thought had gone out forever. I didn't have capital, office space, or even my old laptop. It had been company property. But I had a legal pad from the dollar store and a borrowed computer at the public library. That's where I sat for hours, scribbling out a business plan that felt both pathetic and audacious. I named it Green Horizon Consulting. It sounded professional, even if it was just me, alone at a scratched plastic table, heart pounding with both terror and hope. I wasn't building Carter & Sons 2.0. I was building something that wouldn't compromise its values just to make a buck. My first official meeting with Caroline was at a diner off Aurora Avenue. I showed up in my one decent blazer, dry cleaned with quarters I'd scraped from the couch cushions. She took one look at me and nodded like she saw right through the act and respected it anyway. We spread out my hand-drawn site sketches between our coffee mugs, debating solar orientation and rainwater catchment like we were planning the Taj Mahal instead of a tiny community center. She didn't coddle me. She expected me to be the expert she knew I was. At night, I'd come home to my studio and sit on the floor among boxes, typing up budgets and researching reclaimed materials. My fingers ached. My back hurt from the cheap folding chair. But I felt alive for the first time in months. There was no safety net, no dad's name on the paperwork, just me and my ideas. When fear threatened to paralyze me, I'd whisper, "Understood," like a promise not to quit. I refused to let them have the last word about who I was. Money was tight in a way I'd never experienced. I pawned my watch and sold the last of my designer handbags. I learned to love canned soup and store-brand everything. But every dollar I saved went back into the business. I printed business cards on flimsy stock and handed them out like candy. I emailed every small firm in Seattle offering my services. Some ignored me. A few politely declined, but one or two said yes. That was all I needed. I wasn't rebuilding the old life. I was forging something new from the wreckage. It wasn't grand yet. It wasn't stable, but it was mine. Every line I drew, every contract I signed, every promise I made and kept was proof I was still here. They hadn't erased me. They hadn't won. Caroline's community center project became my obsession in the best possible way. I treated every detail like it would make or break my future, because it did. I spent hours meeting with residents, listening to what they actually wanted. Not just a building, but a place they could be proud of. Kids needed safe after-school rooms. Elders needed accessible bathrooms. Everyone wanted a garden. I sketched and resketched until my fingers cramped, refusing to deliver anything half-baked. I found ways to make sustainability work on a shoestring budget, calling in old favors and sourcing reclaimed materials no one else would bother with. Instead of expensive solar arrays, I designed passive solar features with large south-facing windows and overhangs. Instead of pricey green roofs, we used rain gardens to manage runoff naturally. Every choice balanced cost, durability, and beauty. I wasn't just managing a project. I was proving my entire philosophy had value. There were setbacks, of course. Contractors pulled out when they heard my name, worried about family drama. Vendors demanded cash up front I didn't have. I cried more than once on that ugly studio floor. But Caroline never wavered. She'd call me late at night and just say, "Keep going." Sometimes that was all I needed. One person who still believed I could do it. When construction finally began, I was on site every day in a cheap hard hat with my new logo slapped on it. Mud caked my boots, and I loved it. I worked alongside crews who at first didn't know what to make of me but soon learned I knew my stuff. I carried drywall, hauled trash, problem solved on the fly. It wasn't beneath me. It was exactly where I belonged. The day we finished, I walked through the empty halls in silence, running my hand along the new walls. They smelled of fresh paint and possibility. I thought about all the kids who'd sit here, the families who'd gather in the garden. I stood in the main hall and let myself cry. Not from grief this time, but from relief. From gratitude. From the knowledge I'd built something good, no matter what they said about me. When the city held the ribbon cutting, I stood in the back, letting Caroline take the mic. She deserved it. But when she called me forward, her hand on my shoulder, I felt the old fear crawl up my spine. What if no one clapped? What if they still saw me as damaged goods? But they did clap. The neighbors smiled. A few even hugged me. I realized then that respect didn't have to be inherited. It could be earned. Even from strangers. Especially from strangers. I remember looking up at the sign over the door. Northside Community Center. No Carter name on it. No family legacy. Just a place meant to serve people who deserved better. I felt lighter than I had in years. For so long, I thought my worth was tied to the company, to my father's approval, to the illusion of being chosen. But that day, I understood something deeper. My worth was in what I built, not what I inherited. When I went home that night, I didn't sit in the dark. I turned on every cheap lamp in the studio, made myself a real dinner, and even poured a glass of wine. I toasted no one but myself. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't over it. But I was alive. I was still here, still trying. And for the first time, that felt like enough. I sat on the floor, laptop open, drafting plans for the next job Caroline had lined up. My inbox had gone from empty to overflowing with small firms wanting my help. Word had gotten out about the community center, about the crazy woman who made green building work on a shoestring. I'd become the consultant no one else could be, because no one else cared the way I did. And in that moment, for the first time in forever, I didn't think about my father's voicemail. I didn't think about understood like it was an ending. I thought about it like it was a beginning. The first word in a promise I was finally ready to keep. To myself. A year after that first project, I found myself standing in a crowded hotel ballroom under harsh fluorescent lights, clutching a glass of cheap white wine I didn't really want. I hadn't planned to attend the Pacific Northwest Sustainable Building Awards. Caroline had nominated me without telling me, calling it a marketing move for Green Horizon. When they read out my name, I felt my legs wobble. Fingers going cold. I hadn't prepared a speech. I hadn't expected to win. I walked to the stage on autopilot, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out the applause. I gripped the podium, looking out at faces I recognized from my old life. Architects, contractors, city planners. A few turned away awkwardly, remembering the drama with my family. But most were smiling, waiting, respectful. I cleared my throat and somehow found my voice. "Thank you," I said, feeling tears prick my eyes. This project wasn't about profit margins. It was about people. About proving sustainable design can work for everyone, not just those who can pay a premium. The applause felt unreal. For months, I'd been scraping by on faith and hustle, building something from nothing. Now I was getting a glass trophy with my name on it. I held it up like proof that all the pain hadn't been pointless. That even after they tried to erase me, I'd written my name back into the industry in a new way, a better way. I didn't need the Carter name to be respected. I just needed to keep my promises, to do the work right. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand, some asking if I was taking on new clients. I laughed in disbelief, business cards sweaty in my palm. I felt something crack open inside me, a cautious kind of hope. The realization that maybe I hadn't just survived the betrayal. Maybe I was starting to thrive because of it. That knowledge was heady, intoxicating, terrifying in the best way. That night I went home and put the award on the cheapest IKEA shelf in my studio apartment. It didn't look out of place. It belonged there. Because I'd earned it on my own terms. The thought made me laugh, then cry, then laugh again. I fell asleep with the lights on, trophy shining like a tiny beacon in the dark. Months later, I got a text from Mom. Just 4 words. "Your father wants you." I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over reply. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend I never saw it. Another part of me, smaller but stubborn, felt something twist in my chest. He'd ignored me for so long, fired me like a stranger. But now he was asking? I couldn't understand it, but I also couldn't let it go unanswered. When I finally walked into his hospital room, it was like stepping back in time and seeing someone else's father. He looked small, fragile, tubes everywhere, machines beeping softly. Mom sat beside him holding his hand, eyes red from crying. He turned his head when I entered, and for a second, I thought he'd pretend not to know me. Instead, he whispered my name, just Emily, and that broke something in me. We didn't have a grand confrontation. No screaming, no cathartic confessions. Just a quiet, halting conversation full of stops and starts. He told me he was wrong, that he let fear of change make him cruel, that Walter and Nathan convinced him I'd take everything from him if he didn't act, that he thought I was trying to cut him out. I wanted to rage at him for believing lies, but I didn't have the energy anymore. Instead, I told him what hurt the most wasn't being fired. It was realizing I'd become disposable, that he didn't even think I deserved a conversation before cutting me off. He closed his eyes and nodded, voice breaking when he said he was sorry. I didn't say I forgave him. I didn't know if I did, but I told him I was okay, that I'd built something new, that I was happy. And in his eyes, I saw both pain and pride. When I left, Mom hugged me so tightly it hurt. She whispered thank you into my hair. I drove home in silence, thinking about how messy love is, how family can hurt you worse than anyone. But sometimes you still go back, not because they deserve it, but because you need to know you tried, even if you never fully heal. Green Horizon grew slowly, the way real things do. Word spread about the woman who could make sustainability work even on impossible budgets. I hired a part-time assistant, then 2 junior consultants. We moved from my studio apartment to a tiny shared office with peeling paint and terrible heating, but it was ours. Every contract I signed felt like another brick in the foundation of a life I'd built for myself. No shortcuts, no compromises. I stopped defining myself by the Carter name. Clients didn't care who my father was. They cared that I listened, that I delivered what I promised, that I treated their communities with respect. I felt lighter without the weight of the old expectations on my shoulders. I could experiment, innovate, care about the details that had gotten me fired in the first place. The very things that made me different were now my biggest strengths. Sometimes I'd see Dad's name pop up on my phone. We talked carefully, politely, never about business, occasionally about Mom's health, or the weather, or the Seahawks. I wouldn't call it healing, more like a truce, but it was enough for now. Nathan and I didn't speak at all, and I'd accepted that. Some bridges don't need rebuilding. At night, I'd stand in the doorway of my new office and let myself feel proud. Even if money was tight, even if the work was hard, it was mine. No one could take it from me with a voicemail. No one could tell me I didn't belong. I had built something good out of the wreckage they left me, and that was worth more than any family legacy. I used to think understood was the end of my story. A cold, final word. But now I see it for what it really was. A promise. A commitment to keep going even when everything fell apart. To understand my own worth. To choose myself. Every day I show up for this work, I keep that promise. And for the first time, I can say I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. If you've made it this far, thank you. Seriously. Sharing this wasn't easy, and listening to it isn't easy either. But I hope it did more than just entertain you. I hope it made you feel seen. Maybe you've been there too. Cut out by people you trusted. Forced to start over from nothing. If you have, I want you to know you're not broken. You're not worthless. You're not alone. You're someone who still gets to choose what comes next. If this story meant something to you, please take a second to hit that like button. It's such a small thing, but it helps this video reach more people who might need to hear it. Maybe someone out there is sitting in their version of a tiny studio apartment right now, thinking it's over for them. Maybe your like will be what gets this story in front of them, because sometimes that's all it takes. One voice in the dark saying, I understand. And if you want to stick around for more, hit subscribe. I'll be sharing more stories like this. Not fairy tales, not polished corporate nonsense. Real stories about rebuilding, failure, betrayal, resilience. The stuff we don't talk about enough. Because the world has enough highlight reels. What we need are the messy, honest truths that remind us we're all just figuring it out. If you really want to support this work, there's also a super thanks option down below. It's that little heart icon with a $sign. Click it if you're able and leave a tip to help keep these videos going. It helps cover editing, research, and frankly just keeps the lights on so I can keep telling these stories. Even a small amount makes a difference, and I'll be forever grateful. And finally, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Share your own story of starting over if you feel safe to. Or just say hi, because the best part of all of this is knowing I'm not shouting into a void, that there are real people on the other side of this screen who understand. And together, maybe we can prove there's life after loss. And that understood doesn't have to be the end, it can be the beginning. The